Welcome back guys, Sly Bacon here. As with most of my videos, this one started with a question. That question being, where did the Warhammer vampires come from? So that's what we're going to be covering in today's video. So 2,500 years ago, before the birth of Sigma, so that kind of shows you how far back we're going, there was a civilization called Nihikara. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Within the civilization there was multiple regions, each one ruled by a priest king. One of these priest kings was called Cetra. He was an arrogant SOB and conquered all the other regions and forced the other king priests to pay tribute to him. His arrogance led him to vow he would never die, and he set all his priests to the task of finding a way for him to cheat death. He became obsessed with death and the afterlife, and he made the civilization erect huge temples and monuments in honour of the dead. These cities became massive and were later called necropoli. In the end, all his efforts were in vain and he died anyway. But events had been set in motion, and it was into this culture of the undead that Nagash was born, who was the brother of the current ruling priest king. Nagash soon rose to the position of high priest, and Nagash's obsession with magic began. The civilization was too far south to be able to harness the winds of magic, so Nagash focused on death magic, with his main focus being, as was Cetra's, in creating immortality. All the other civilizations in the world heard of this and shunned Nagash. But during a storm, a dark elf ship was blown off course and crashed into the Nihikara region, and the survivors were captured and imprisoned in the tomb of Nagash's dead father for reasons. One of the captured dark elves was a high priestess, and she offered to reveal her knowledge of magic to Nagash in exchange for her life, which was an offer he gladly accepted. However, once Nagash had learned all he could from the dark elves, they were never heard from again, funnily enough. Nagash's knowledge had grown vast, and he was able to hold off the effects of aging. However, he had not stopped the slow decay of his flesh. Nagash then constructed a giant black pyramid which emanated waves of black magic which tainted the surrounding land, which we now know as corruption. Now back to earlier, the priest kings, these guys were still around, and they weren't overly happy about what Nagash was doing, so they banded their armies together and invaded. They were easily able to overthrow Nagash. Knowing his fate at their hands, Nagash swore vengeance on their descendants for what they had done. The priest kings obviously laughed this off as an empty threat, and Nagash's priests were beheaded and burnt under the daylight sun. Nagash himself escaped. One of the priest kings, Neferata, who was actually a priest queen, stole Nagash's books of magic instead of destroying them as was agreed upon. Once the war was over, the priest kings returned to their homelands, and Neferata attempted to replicate the elixir of life. She was successful to a degree. Her heart stopped beating, she stopped breathing, but she did not die. She became the first true vampire. Realizing she would need a stronger army, she gave the elixir to an unknown number of her lieutenants. After a while, the vampires learned that they did not need the elixir to create new vampires. Instead, they could use a process called the blood kiss. Sometime later, the vampires learnt that Nagash was still alive and sent envoys to meet him. Unfortunately, some of these envoys were captured by the neighbouring kingdoms, who, realising the threat Nagash and the vampires posed, banded together again and invaded the vampire lands. The few that remained fled north to Nagash. Once there, Nagash made these few remaining vampires the generals of his army. The priest kings, however, did not stop with just the vampires, and turned their army north to wipe out Nagash. During the battle, the vampires fled. For their cowardice, Nagash cursed the vampires to be burnt by the rays of the sun. After this event, the vampires spread across the world, creating their own separate bloodlines. So there we go, that's how the vampires came about within the Warhammer world. Very interesting. It's actually a massive read if you guys want to go and read it. It's about 3 or 4 pages long, the history, and this was just really a condensed version and picking out all the fun and interesting bits. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you next time.